California is bracing for yet another atmospheric river to hit the state. That's now forecast to roll in tonight and stay until Wednesday. Some areas set to see as much as 20 centimeters of rain. The state is already experiencing widespread flooding. One of the worst hit areas, Monterey County, where heavy rains breached a river levee Friday night. It's home to a number of fruit and vegetable farms that have also been hit.
We had like a few minutes, like maybe 30 minutes. So we grabbed just the necessary things, like blankets or a little bit of clothes.
Most are low-income Latino farm workers, many immigrants, and this is the worst thing that could have happened to them at this time. These are residents who have the least, and so this being evacuated and the damage to their homes and their vehicles and their businesses is going to be severe.
U.S. President Joe Biden issued an emergency declaration for California on Friday. Now, that's allowed the federal disaster agency FEMA to coordinate relief efforts in several counties. Steve Futterman is covering all of this for us, and he's up bright and early in Los Angeles. Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk about how people are preparing and how serious the situation is already.
Well, it is a very serious situation, even without this new atmospheric river, which is going to hit throughout the day, probably by around midday in many parts of California, this wide expanse of areas that have been hit by rain and even snow in the last couple of weeks. The storm's going to be hitting by around noontime, mostly northern California, the central coast, Monterey, as you mentioned, very difficult situation. That one town you talked about, Pajaro, very small farming town. Basically, the entire town has been forced to leave, virtually every street engulfed by water, much of that having to do with a levee that breached on the Pajaro River. So they've had some additional problems in addition to Mother Nature. Now, obviously, with the ground so saturated already, there's not much area for the water to go, and that's what's going to cause the flooding. These rivers, these creeks are already overflowing in many cases. They can't really handle any more water yet. That's what they're going to be facing today. You mentioned crops. Well, Central California, sort of a very much of a vegetable and fruit basket for all of North America. Many crops are likely to be destroyed. Everyone might feel that eventually with some prices going up, but there is concern about that as well. Now, as you mentioned, these areas are going to be hit mostly today, and then there may be a bit of a respite Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but then another storm is going to be coming in. Maybe not as severe as this, but you don't need that severe a storm now with the water so saturated in the ground. So, you know, in the past, you would need a very large storm to cause problems. You don't need much water right now because the ground cannot handle much water. But California facing what it's been facing really throughout this year right now. More rain right now. They've dealt with the snow. And of course, we should point out that the melting snow, also an issue. When the rain comes down, it melts the snow. You don't just have the new rainwater come down, but you have the melting snow. So it's sort of a double whammy. California will get through this. Many people have evacuated from their homes already, some saying they're going to stay. But it's going to be a very difficult 24 hours, especially in these areas that have been very hard hit, especially the Central Coast, especially Monterey County, California.
Steve, thanks for this. Steve Futterman reporting for us from Los Angeles.